Nobody thought this beef would ever reach this point again, but NBA YoungBoy just flipped the switch, and now the tension with Boosie is officially back in the danger zone. What started as silence and distance has suddenly turned into something way more serious, and fans can feel it in the air. One post, one move, one message, and suddenly the hip-hop world is asking the same question: how far is this about to go? For years, Boosie was seen as a mentor figure, someone who stood up for YoungBoy when the industry was against him. But loyalty in hip-hop is fragile, and this relationship cracked publicly before. Now, with emotions still raw and history unresolved, YoungBoy's latest actions suggest he's no longer holding anything back. No interviews, no long explanations, just a calculated move that speaks louder than words, and that's what has everyone worried. What makes this moment different is timing. Both artists are in completely different phases of their careers, yet the past refuses to stay buried. Fans are dissecting lyrics, social media behavior, and behind-the-scenes connections, trying to decode whether this is just another warning shot or the beginning of something irreversible. And here's the part nobody can ignore. When NBA YoungBoy goes quiet, things usually escalate. This isn't clout chasing. This doesn't feel like promo. This feels personal. And if history tells us anything, it's that unresolved respect issues in hip-hop never end peacefully. So the real question isn't if this beef explodes, it's when. And once it does, there may be no turning back. So the real question isn't if this beef explodes, it's when. And to understand why this situation feels heavier than before, you have to rewind and look at how deeply connected NBA YoungBoy and Boosie once were. At one point, Boosie wasn't just another rapper showing love, he was publicly defending YoungBoy when most of the industry either stayed silent or distanced themselves. During YoungBoy's early legal troubles and constant media pressure, Boosie spoke like a big brother. He criticized the system, called out hypocrisy, and made it clear that he saw YoungBoy as a product of his environment, not a villain. Fans noticed. The streets noticed. That bond looked real. But in hip-hop, respect is everything and respect is fragile. The first cracks started showing when fans noticed a shift in tone. Interviews felt colder. Mentions stopped. Collaborations that once seemed inevitable never happened. Instead of public support, there was distance. At the time, many brushed it off as growth, different paths, or simply business. But behind the scenes, tension was clearly building. Boosie eventually broke the silence, suggesting that YoungBoy had changed not musically, but personally. He implied that fame, money, and isolation had altered how YoungBoy viewed the people who once stood by him. While Boosie didn't initially name names aggressively, the message was clear enough for fans to connect the dots. And once that door opened, it couldn't be closed. YoungBoy's response wasn't immediate. And that's what made it unsettling. Instead of clapping back with interviews or loud social media rants, YoungBoy did what he often does best: he moved quietly. No explanations. No apologies. Just subtle actions that spoke volumes. Unfollows. Lyrics that felt pointed. Energy that felt different. To the casual listener, it was nothing. To hardcore fans, it was a warning. Now fast forward to the present, and that warning feels like it's turning into a statement. The latest spark didn't come with a direct diss, which is exactly why it feels serious. When beef reaches the stage where words aren't loud anymore, that's usually when emotions are at their highest. Fans notice the timing, the symbolism, and the silence surrounding the move. And once again, the internet did what it does best. It connected everything. This isn't happening in a vacuum. NBA YoungBoy has been extremely selective about who he acknowledges publicly. He's cut ties before, burned bridges, and made it clear that once he feels disrespected, there's rarely a path back. That pattern alone is why fans are nervous. When YoungBoy decides someone is no longer family, the split tends to be permanent. Boosie, on the other hand, represents a different generation, one that values public accountability and verbal respect. When Boosie feels slighted, he speaks on it. He explains his side. He wants the audience to understand his intentions. That difference in communication style is a major reason this beef keeps resurfacing. One side moves silently. The other speaks openly. and silence often feels louder than words. What makes this situation even more dangerous is how invested the fans are. Both artists have loyal, emotional fan bases that take sides instantly. Every lyric gets dissected. Every post becomes evidence. Every interview clip turns into fuel. At this point, even accidental references can escalate things further. And then there's the street aspect, the unspoken layer that fans feel but rarely discuss openly. Both artists come from environments where disrespect isn't just personal, it's symbolic. When pride gets involved, logic often leaves the room. That's why people close to the culture are watching this carefully. They know how quickly unresolved tension can turn into something bigger. Another key factor is timing. NBA YoungBoy is in a phase where he feels untouchable creatively and mentally isolated from the industry. He doesn't need approval. He doesn't need features. He doesn't need validation. That level of independence can be empowering, but it can also make reconciliation nearly impossible. When someone believes they've outgrown the people who helped them, conversations stop happening. Boosie, meanwhile, feels like his contributions are being erased. From his perspective, loyalty was shown when it mattered most, and silence now feels like betrayal. That emotional gap is where this beef truly lives. Not on social media, not in songs, but in unspoken expectations that were never aligned. What's alarming fans most is how familiar this feels. Hip-hop history is full of mentor-turned-opponent stories that ended badly because pride won over communication. And when fans sense that neither side is willing to step back, fear replaces excitement. This no longer feels like entertainment, it feels personal. As of now, neither artist has fully addressed the situation head-on. But sometimes, that's the loudest response of all. The moves are being made. The lines are being drawn. And if part one of this story tells us anything, it's that the foundation of this beef was never truly repaired, only paused. And when paused tension gets restarted, it usually doesn't end quietly. That's exactly why the recent developments between NBA YoungBoy and Boosie have fans on edge. This time, it doesn't feel like a misunderstanding or a temporary emotional reaction. It feels intentional, strategic. Almost like both sides have accepted that whatever happens next is going to be public and permanent. The latest wave of attention didn't come from a diss record or a viral interview. Instead, it came from silence paired with timing. Fans noticed that right as Boosie began speaking again about loyalty, respect, and being forgotten by those he once defended, YoungBoy made subtle but powerful moves that suggested he wasn't interested in reconciliation. No shoutouts, no acknowledgement, just distance. And in hip-hop culture, distance can be interpreted as disrespect. Boosie, known for speaking his mind, didn't hide how that made him feel. In recent appearances, his tone shifted. What once sounded like disappointment started sounding like frustration. He didn't just talk about YoungBoy as an artist anymore, he spoke as someone who felt personally dismissed. That emotional shift mattered. When rappers stop separating business from personal feelings, lines begin to blur fast. Fans immediately split into camps. One side believes YoungBoy owes Boosie respect for standing by him during critical moments. They point to interviews, public statements, and the way Boosie defended him when the media painted YoungBoy as a lost cause. To them, silence isn't strength, it's ingratitude. The other side sees YoungBoy as someone who outgrew a situation that no longer aligned with his mindset. They argue that loyalty doesn't mean lifelong obligation, and that YoungBoy has the right to move however he wants without explaining himself. From their perspective, Boosie talking publicly only confirms why YoungBoy stays silent. That divide is exactly what keeps this beef alive. Social media, as expected, turned the situation into a non-stop debate. Old clips resurfaced. Lyrics were replayed. Screenshots circulated. Fans began building timelines, trying to pinpoint the exact moment the relationship shifted from brotherhood to tension. And while none of this came directly from the artists themselves, the noise surrounding it made silence impossible to ignore. Another layer that made things more serious is how close this situation hits to home for both men. This isn't two rappers beefing over chart positions or clout. This is about respect, acknowledgement, and feeling valued. Those are emotional triggers that don't fade with time. They grow. YoungBoy's history shows that when he feels misunderstood or disrespected, he doesn't chase closure. He cuts ties. He turns inward. And he lets his music carry the weight. That pattern alone has fans watching his next release closely. Not because they expect a diss, but because they expect emotion. And emotion can be more damaging than insults. Boosie, on the other hand, has never been one to let feelings sit quietly. When he believes the truth needs to be said, he says it regardless of backlash. That difference in approach creates a dangerous imbalance. One side speaking, one side is silent, and the audience filling in the blanks. What's especially concerning is how normalized this situation has become. Fans are no longer asking if they'll reconcile, they're asking who speaks next. That shift in mindset means expectations have changed. Reconciliation no longer feels like the natural ending. Conflict does. And when conflict becomes the expected outcome, every action gets interpreted through that lens. Industry figures have stayed noticeably quiet, which only adds to the tension. In the past, situations like this would invite mediation, mutual friends stepping in, private conversations happening off camera. But this time, no one seems eager to play peacemaker. That silence suggests either conversations have already failed or no one wants to get involved. There's also the generational gap. Boosie comes from an era where acknowledgement mattered publicly. Respect was shown out loud. YoungBoy belongs to a generation that believes silence is power and explanations are unnecessary. Neither approach is wrong, but when they collide, misunderstandings become inevitable. As days pass without resolution, the atmosphere grows heavier. Fans sense that both sides are standing firm. No apologies. No olive branches. Just quiet persistence. And in hip-hop, unresolved pride rarely dissolves on its own. What makes this chapter especially risky is how unpredictable it feels. There's no clear endgame. No rollout. No narrative control. Just raw emotion and public perception shaping the story in real time. That unpredictability is what separates serious situations from temporary drama. At this point, even a small statement could shift everything. A single line in a song, a sentence in an interview, a name mentioned casually. Any of it could escalate the tension beyond repair. That's why fans are watching closely, not with excitement, but with concern. Because they've seen how stories like this end before. By now, it's clear that this beef isn't about the past alone. It's about identity. About who feels seen. About who feels replaced. And about whether silence is interpreted as growth or disrespect. Those questions don't have easy answers, which is why the tension refuses to fade. And as this story continues to unfold, one thing becomes unavoidable. Whatever happens next will define how this relationship is remembered, not as brotherhood, but as a warning. At this stage, the question is no longer about who started what or who said what first. The real question now is whether this situation has already crossed the point of no return. Because once pride replaces communication, even the smallest move can feel like an attack. And between NBA YoungBoy and Boosie, pride is now sitting front and center. There are only a few realistic paths left for this situation, and none of them are simple. The first possibility is escalation through music. This is the path fans expect the most, and historically, it's the one that feels safest on the surface. Lyrics become coded. Names aren't said directly, but everyone knows who the message is aimed at. Pain turns into bars, and frustration turns into tone. If YoungBoy chooses this route, it won't sound like a traditional diss. It will sound emotional, detached, and heavy, the kind of music that doesn't shout but still cuts deep. That kind of response would likely push Boosie to speak even louder, because silence in the face of music feels like confirmation to someone who values verbal accountability. The second possibility is public confrontation through interviews and social commentary. This is Boosie's natural territory. If he feels like the narrative is being shaped without his voice, he may decide to lay everything out, how he felt, what he did, and why the distance hurts. The danger with this approach is that once details go public, they can't be taken back. What starts as an explanation can quickly feel like exposure, especially to someone as private as YoungBoy. And if YoungBoy interprets honesty as disrespect, the divide only widens. The third and most unpredictable outcome is continued silence paired with decisive separation. No more indirect references. No more tension-filled moments. Just complete disconnection. This might seem peaceful, but it's often the most painful ending. Silence without closure leaves narratives unfinished, and fans will fill in the gaps forever. For Boosie, this would likely feel like erasure. For YoungBoy, it might feel like freedom. But freedom and resentment can exist at the same time. What makes this situation especially heavy is the emotional weight behind it. Boosie didn't just defend YoungBoy as an artist, he defended him as a human being when the world was ready to write him off. That kind of support creates unspoken expectations. YoungBoy, on the other hand, grew up fast in an industry that rarely offers safety. To him, survival meant learning how to move alone. Those two mindsets were never aligned. They just coexisted until they couldn't anymore. Fans hoping for reconciliation are holding on to the idea that respect can still outweigh pride. That a private conversation could undo years of distance. But reconciliation requires both sides to believe they still need each other, and right now, that belief doesn't seem to exist. Both men appear convinced in their own positions, and conviction leaves very little room for compromise. There's also the larger cultural lesson unfolding in real time. Hip-hop has always struggled with mentorship. Older artists want appreciation. Younger artists want autonomy. When gratitude turns into obligation and guidance turns into expectation, relationships fracture. This situation is becoming a case study in how generational misunderstandings can destroy genuine bonds. Another concern is how outside voices influence the situation. Friends, fans, and commentators often amplify emotions instead of calming them. Every clip gets dissected. Every statement gets twisted. And both artists are surrounded by people who benefit from conflict more than peace. That environment makes resolution even harder. Yet despite all of this, there's still a quiet truth that fans can't ignore. Neither NBA YoungBoy nor Boosie actually gains anything from this going further. No legacy is improved. No respect is restored through public tension. What's at stake isn't relevance, it's reputation. And history has shown that unresolved beef between respected figures often overshadows their contributions. If this story ends in full escalation, it will be remembered not as a rivalry, but as a failure of communication. A moment where pride spoke louder than gratitude and silence replaced understanding. And that's the kind of ending that leaves no winners. But if there's one final path left, it's a private resolution. Not for fans. Not for headlines. Just for peace. That doesn't mean collaboration. It doesn't mean public apologies. It simply means mutual acknowledgement without an audience. Whether that happens or not remains uncertain. What is certain is this: the relationship between NBA YoungBoy and Boosie will never return to what it once was. Too much time has passed. Too much tension is built. The best possible outcome now is closure, not reunion. And as fans continue to watch this unfold, one thing becomes painfully clear. This was never just about music. It was about respect, growth, and two men who outgrew the same moment in completely different ways. Sometimes, the most serious beefs aren't loud at all. They're the ones that end in silence. If you're really watching this situation unfold, don't stay silent. Drop a comment right now and tell us whose side you're on, NBA YoungBoy or Boosie. Or do you think this beef should have been handled privately before it reached this point? Hit the like button if you believe hip-hop needs more respect and less ego, and subscribe for real breakdowns, untold backstories, and updates the moment this situation takes another turn. Turn on post notifications because if either of them responds, through music, interviews, or moves behind the scenes, you'll hear it here first. This story isn't over, and when the next chapter drops, you don't want to miss it.